The average house in San Mateo County costs over $1.3 million. The average rent for a one-bedroom place in San Mateo County is $2,600 a month. So how is a school teacher or someone making minimum wage or even a senior wanting to stay in his or her home on fixed income supposed to stay or find stable housing in San Mateo County? There is a solution, and it's called HIP Housing. I'm Gloria Cohn, and this is City Hall in Focus. And with me today is the Associate Executive Director of HIP Housing, Laura Fanucchi. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
What does HIP stand for?
HIP stands for Human Investment Project, and we are a nonprofit organization here in San Mateo County.
And your mission is to?
Our mission is to invest in human potential by improving the housing and lives of people here in our community in San Mateo County.
And you have several programs to do this, right?
Yes, we do. We have a self-sufficiency program for families with children. So we work with two-parent and single-parent families who are in school or doing job training, and we help to provide them with housing support for a year to 5 years while they're working on their career and their educational goals. We provide them with case management support and other resources to help the families to become economically self-sufficient. We also have a property development side to our organization. So we own 15 properties here in San Mateo County, in Daly City, South San Francisco, San Mateo, San Carlos, Redwood City, and Menlo Park. And we also manage properties for the cities of Foster City and San Mateo. So those units provide housing for single parents and seniors, usually in studio, one-bedroom and two-bedroom apartments that are considered below market rent or subsidized rent.
You today want to specifically talk about your home sharing program,
Yes.
So why don't you describe that?
Great. So our home sharing program provides a great resource for affordable housing here in San Mateo County. The home sharing program matches who we call our home providers. These are homeowners or renters who have space available in their home and need a little extra income or sometimes a little extra support, like help with household chores for reduced rent. And then we interview people who are seeking housing. So it usually is a single person or a couple or maybe a single parent with a child, and they're really struggling with their housing costs here in the county, are looking for an affordable way to reduce their costs by home sharing. So the clients interview each other after they go through an extensive screening process by the organization, and they get to make their own decision about who they want to share housing with.
I want to talk about the screening process, but first let me ask you, your funding sources are from where?
So we receive funding from the majorities of the cities here in San Mateo County, including the County of San Mateo. We also receive foundation support and private grants and donations. And because the organization also is a property manager and owner, we also receive rental income that helps to support the programs that we offer at HIP Housing.
Let's go now to the screening process that you started talking about. Is there a real-life case scenario you could step us through to explain how it works?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a client, I'll just call her Cora, and she lives in the North County, and she's a senior. So a typical profile of our home providers are usually seniors. And we set up a time to meet with her. She came to one of our 4 offices. So we have an office in Daly City, South San Francisco, San Mateo, and in Redwood City. But for our home providers, we also like to visit them at their home. So we made a home visit with her as well. And so what we do is we have a screening process where we ask the clients to provide us with proof of their ID, proof of their income, and the names and phone numbers of 3 character references. And we ask that of both of our home providers and our home seekers. So we meet also with our home seekers in our offices as well. And the clients get to complete an application to tell us in their own words what they're looking for in a housemate. So why they're looking for a housemate, what is their lifestyle, a little bit about their home or what kind of room they're looking for. And then that helps us to sort of narrow down the search for what their needs are.
Sometimes do you have, genders mixing as well? So an elderly woman doesn't mind a young student, a male student going to Stanford, let's say.
Exactly. Okay. So clients just really make their own decision about who they want to select as a housemate. So Cora selected actually two seekers through our program. One is a senior who had
Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will now call to order the City Council Successor Agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting for March 28, 2022. Will you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the
flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll move on to item 3, changes to the order of the agenda. Would anyone, Jeff, is there any changes from staff this evening?
Nothing from staff this evening, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Anything from my colleagues? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 4, council communications and announcements. These are brief items from members of the City Council regarding upcoming events in the community and correspondence that they have received. I see Councilmember Collins, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of reports from my recent Caltrain electrification meeting last week. Caltrain starting, I believe, Friday, April 1st, is going to be discounting fares 50% for the next several months as they're trying to get ridership back to normal. And ridership is approaching 30%. It's nowhere near what it was before the pandemic, but it is improving, and that's good news. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Anything else from my colleagues? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to item 5, public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so at this time. If the item you are speaking on is not listed on the agenda, please be advised that the City Council may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed under the Brown Act. The City Council's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have a matter placed on a future City Council agenda for a more comprehensive action or report. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. Crystal, is anyone waiting to make a public comment this evening?
No, I don't see any hands up.
Okay, thank you. Then we will move on to the consent calendar. Do any of my colleagues wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to let everyone know that I'm going to abstain from voting on item 6D because my street is listed. And although I have been advised I don't need to recuse myself out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to abstain from that. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I move to approve City Council successor agent to the Redevelopment Agency consent calendar items A through C and item E.
We can take it all in one motion if you like, Councilmember Palmer-Lohan, and I'll just amend my vote.
Okay, all right. Consent calendars items A through E. I stand corrected.
Second.
Is there a second? Okay, thank you. Any discussion on these items? Seeing none, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Okay, Vice Mayor Rack.
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes.
Councilmember Collins.
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer-Lohan.
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell.
Yes on items 6A through C and E, and abstain on 6D, please. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on now to item 7, reports to council. These are updates on key city projects by city staff and city council subcommittees. Tonight, we will be receiving a report on the city's state of the streets from Stephen Machida.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council Member Stephen Machida, Public Works Director. I'll be presenting the report on the state of the streets. Next slide. So what tonight we'll be discussing is the pavement management program, the existing roadway network, the pavement condition index or PCI, and the distress, the current and future pavement condition index, as well as maintenance treatments. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So the pavement management program, or PMP, is a program that we use to determine how we're going to address our streets. The PMP is performed every 2 to 3 years, with the last update being conducted in 2019. Besides evaluating streets, the PMP also assists in budgeting and recommends project over the next 5 years of the project. Next slide, please. So functional classification. So all the streets in our community are kind of classified either as an arterial, collector, or residential or local street. So our arterials are high capacity streets, segments with an average daily traffic of 15,000 to 50,000 vehicles per day. And these streets are something typical that you might see at St. Carlos Avenue, Alameda de las Pulgas, or Britton Avenue. Collectors are moderate to low capacity street segments with average daily traffic of 5,000 to 15,000. And this is similar to streets like Cedar, Cordilleras, Eaton, or Elm. And all the balance of the streets are either residential or local streets. And these segments are characterized as low capacity streets with average daily traffic of 1,000 to 5,000. And typically they're like Baytree or Orange. Next slide, please. So the roadway network, in the previous slide, we talked about the functional classification. So in this slide, we discussed the makeup. So I won't go into too much detail, but other than maybe just somebody describing what the total sections, the total centerline miles, and total lane miles. So total section is the section of roadway that's separated by 2 intersections. So in our case, we have about 494 total sections within our street, within our streets. Our total lane miles is the total mileage of roadway along the center line, irrespective of the number of lanes. So in our community, we have just a little over 86 miles. And total lane miles is the total mileage of roadway covered by multiple center line mileage times the number of lanes. And again, that's essentially double. And that's about a little less than 180 miles. Next slide, please. So this is probably where, the council is probably most interested in this pavement condition index. So basically, these are street segments that are assessed by using an algorithm by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So factors includes or evaluates the stress and severity of the stress across the represented samples within this community. And then the PCI, has a range of 0 to 100, where 0 is a failed street segment, while 100 is either a newly paved street or rehabilitated street. Next slide, please. So I'm going next few slides, I'm going to kind of give you just kind of what each type of distress looks like. So in this case, in the upper left-hand corner, you have alligator cracking. It kind of looks like an alligator skin. Right, bottom right is the blocking or block cracking. And so these are much larger cracks, but in much wider apart. Next slide. We have distortion upper left. That's essentially where you might have raised pavement. That's really due to either a base failure or perhaps some root or tree kind of migration. And lower right is you have longitudinal or traverse cracking. So these can either go kind of along the roadway, travel of the roadway, or across the road of travel. Next slide, please. I think you've always, with the patching and utility cuts, you've seen them where either, where the city might be putting a new sewer main, or PG&E is doing some of their work, or Cal Water's doing some work. So that basically is cut up the street to put in their utility and then coming back and patching the street. And then the lower right is the rutting or depression. This situation occurred where you may have some base failure. And so you have a depression of the street itself. Next slide, please. And then these next two are the weathering and raveling. So this is basically where the street starts to weather or kind of gets a little bit rough as it ages. The road surface starts to kind of get a little bit more rough. And so you may see kind of a weathering or actually a severe raveling where you may even see some exposed kind of aggregate of the street itself or the wear surface. Next slide, please. So here's a diagram that kind of shows the range of PCI from 0 to 100. And from very left, you see the failed section where it's deep pothole, lots of failure. Poor is just more of the heavy alligatoring, and probably some depressions. And then at-risk area, you see kind of longitudinal and transverse cracking. In this case, You see some of the crack sealing that has been done. And then to the furthest right, you see the kind of excellent or good or excellent. And that's basically a street that either has been rehabbed or it's a brand new street. Next slide, please. So conditional categories. So the PCIs actually has 4 different categories. You have condition 1, and that's very good to excellent. And it's usually in the 70 to 100 PCI range. And as you can see, we have about 38% of the city streets are in this condition. Condition 2, 3 is that risk or fair, and it's usually has a range of PCI, a range of 50 to 70. And in this case, we have 26% of our streets in this condition. And then condition 4 is poor. We have a range of 25 to 50 PCI. And in this case, we have a percentage about 21% are in this condition. And lastly, condition 5 is poor to fail. In this case, we have 15% in this condition, and this ranges from 0 to 25. Next slide, please. So this is the pavement life expectancy kind of curve that we were talking about. In it, it shows the 4 different categories: 70 to 100, category 1, category 2, 3, category 4, and category 5. And as you see, you have kind of a modified S curve, and this essentially kind of shows you how the pavement kind of wears over time. So very early on, it's it ages quite well, but as you get closer to 15, it starts to deteriorate fairly rapidly. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the overall snapshot of the PCI of the city streets currently. So the light green and the blue. Light green is excellent. The blue is good. So this is, we have quite a few streets in this area, in these categories, with yellow being kind of in the middle of the pack. And then orange and red are the areas of streets that are poor or very poor category. Next slide, please. So the overall history, PCI history over time for 2017 to 2021, as you can see, it's trending downward. And certainly this is not something that, certainly I like to see. It's actually going kind of in the opposite direction that we would like to do. But this is kind of, the state of the city's streets itself. And so, we do have a plan on how to reverse this trend. Next slide, please. So this is the PCI based on the 3 different functional classes. So the arterial, the collector, and local. And as you can see, they all are continue trending downward. Next slide, please. So this is just a diagram, and the purpose of the slide is really take a look at the condition of our streets relative to other cities. So this was actually done in 2020, which is the last graph that we actually have. As I mentioned earlier, we are conducting a update of our PMP, and that will be coming out this year, 2022. However, this kind of gives a really quick snapshot of where we are relative to our counterparts within the peninsula. And so we're not really at the county average of 67, but that's our goal, is to get to that. We're currently at a PCI of 57, and so we do have some effort that we have to do to kind of get back to 67, and I'll kind of outline some of the things that I'm planning to do to reverse the downward trend, if you will. Next slide, please. So here's that slide again that really kind of shows, how our streets kind of wear over time. As I mentioned, what we really like to do is stay within that green area, or PCI 1700, and that's essentially where you have very little failure, very little activity. And then as you go down to yellow, it starts to get worse, so on and so forth. But then as you go along that black S curve, as you would notice, probably right around the shoulder or right around PCI 70, that's where you have a very steep drop or steep curve. And we call that the shoulder of the curve. And so this is, you want to try to always maintain approximately 70 PCI. But once you get at 70, basically it doesn't take very much, or actually it doesn't take very long until for your PCI to drop, even if a very short period of time. So over like a 2-year period, you could actually drop 10 points in PCI scale. So that's not what you really want to do. So the rule of thumb in general, when you're handling street rehab, is you always need to have some type of balance where you kind of do your preventive maintenance treatment, where you want to stay up in that 70 to 100 range, but you also want to focus some of your effort on kind of the poor area in the failed streets. So you have a nice match because you just don't want to focus everything on the poor side of it, because as the streets age, once you reach that shoulder point or year 15, that's when the streets fail very rapidly. And if you don't really address them, it can be somewhat problematic to kind of turn that trend around. And so what I typically like to do is, this is how I kind of liken this to when you go to a dentist. Everybody goes to the dentist every 6 months. Basically, you get your teeth cleaned, you get your teeth checked, and your dentist probably checks, for other items or issues that might be occurring in your mouth. However, if you fail to go to your dentist and say you go every 3 years, that doesn't have that opportunity to do that preventive maintenance or preventive treatment, and therefore over that time you could be occurring or having cavities or other kind of dental issues. So similarly, this is kind of like, I term this as what pavement does, is that you really do need to do all your streets and do some type of treatment over time, to kind of keep your pavement in good shape. Next slide, please. So here's the maintenance treatments. Typically, as I mentioned earlier, your PCI of 90 to 100, there's very little treatment that you can do, although you may do some slurry seal, but typically it doesn't really require that. But once you start getting to the 70, 80, or very good, that's when you may want to consider doing this crack seal, the slurry seal, microsurfacing, and some of these very thin overlays with base failure. Good is the same thing from 50 to 69. You do probably a thin overlay with base failure. And then poor and very poor, that's when you need to really consider either a thick overlay with failure or a total reconstruction. Next slide, please. So here's a photo of some of the maintenance treatment. And this is essentially a thin slurry or a thin overlay where, basically the original street was probably in pretty good shape. We didn't need to do a whole lot of base failure or repair. And so we're able to do kind of a slurry. Next slide, please. So in this photo, you're actually seeing more of a overlay, a thicker overlay, which means that, it had some rutting, it had some probably base fails. And so we did require to do a little bit heavier lift, maybe a 2-inch lift of pavement to restore the street back to its, a very good condition. And next slide, please. And then this third, and this is not a photo that we took, but it's a photo that basically required a complete reconstruction of the street as a result of, just a basic problem. So these are the type of things we really do want to try to avoid. But it is something that, does happen. It is something that, we need to be prepared for, but this is not where, obviously we want to go. So just maybe to conclude the presentation is, what my plan is to move forward with this project, but really is to refocus kind of our efforts on the streets itself, where I believe I'm really going to have a dedicated team, to actually focus on kind of doing the street rehab. Very similar to kind of the program that we use for our sanitary sewer program, where I know we have brought several yearly contracts back to council for approval to do a lot of our sewer work. I think this is a very similar program. We're going to have a very focused team, and we're going to have to add some additional resources so that we can actually address a lot of the issues relative to our streets. And that will require, again, a really focused effort on moving forward. So with that concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Stephen. That was a really wonderful report. I appreciate it. So just as a reminder, we'll take questions, then we'll open up to public comment, and then we'll do council discussion. So I'm looking for hands raised if anyone has any questions for Stephen this evening. Councilmember Dugan, and then Vice Mayor Rath.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And Stephen, thank you for the overview and a better understanding of our street maintenance program. Yeah, I'm a little surprised. You know, I don't get the sense that our streets are in that poor of shape, but I'm glad we're getting on it. I know later this evening we'll be talking about some significant additional funding. My question is, so you showed us kind of the results over time, but why is it we're deteriorating over time? I mean, we have been, you know, this has been an annual program. We have been treating our streets, you know, in our consent calendar this evening, we approved quite a few street treatments. And so I'm just curious, so what we're doing has only allowed us to slow down this backslide? I mean, we're really in that bad of a shape right now?
So thank you for the question. So, you know, that is a good question. So, you know, as I kind of showed you on that little curve that we had, you know, a lot of our streets are kind of approaching that 15-year cycle, if you will. And so it doesn't take much for us to go from, let's say, a PCI of 70, which is a good score, to drop it to a PCI of 50 within 2 years. And unfortunately, if you don't capture it early enough, it drops very rapidly because it drops very rapidly because it's very steep. That's when kind of the end of the life, or maybe 75% of the life is already been kind of up. So the effort that we've been putting forward, although it's been helpful, I think there just has to be a lot more effort and a lot more focus on getting the streets out, or getting the projects out, so that we can move forward. You know, one of the challenges we had recently, and as this was as of 2020, we did have the COVID issues that, unfortunately, it kind of delayed some of our projects. But what it did, it caused a domino effect, if you will, where now our street paving is just slightly off cycle of where we would like it to be. And so that has caused a little bit of a problem where we have seen our PCI, because if we go out a little bit late, we may not be able to finish in a particular season. And typically you want to do this paving kind of in the warmer weather during the summer season, when it's a lot easier to do that kind of construction work versus being in the kind of colder winter months. Yeah. So, you know, what we're really seeing is a lot of our streets kind of are in that 12 to 15 year age, if you will. And so we just have to get it right and get it done.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And then what can we expect? Like, in that consent item we approved, I don't know, it looks like 10 streets for a full overlay and another 8 streets or so for a slurry seal. Presumably the overlay streets are the ones that are in worse shape, but does that take them all back up to like over 90 when we do those procedures? Like what do we get when we do these things?
Well, it won't, it will bring them up. I can't tell you exactly what number it would bring them up, but it will definitely, improve that in those streets when you do the overlay. Obviously, the slurry seal is more of a very quick maintenance, and because those streets are already in probably a high PCI already, it's not going to change that PCI, but it would just kind of extend the life of the street, if that makes sense. So the overlay actually, we're correcting a deficiency, and then the slurry seal is actually kind of hopefully extending the life of the street itself.
And are those just kind of big buckets? Like, is overlay, are there like 4 different things we might do, but call it all an overlay? I mean, I'm trying to, like, is it really we only have 2 tools in the toolbox, a seal slurry or a overlay, or is there more we can do, or anything new on the horizon where we can really get our streets right and kind of get off this treadmill a little bit?
Sure. There are various treatments. I mean, just in general, from staff's perspective and how we describe it, we like to say like the minor overlay. So that could be, just various. And we kind of brought up, where you might do some microsurfacing if it's a very thin overlay. So I didn't really go into the details. Maybe that's something, I could have done, but I didn't want to get too much into the weeds. whereas a slurry is kind of like an emulsion that just goes on top of the existing pavement itself. And so, and you may have some additional rocks or chips. Sometimes they call it chips. And it just adds a little wear surface. It doesn't really provide another layer of pavement. It just kind of extends the life of the pavement itself. But then there's the heavier, thicker overlay. I just returned from a conference where they were talking about using a lot more, and this is not really old, but where they use like a lot of the rubber tires as part of some of the material that you could use for pavement as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that, Steve, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
Those were good questions, John. Thank you. Any other questions from my colleagues tonight? Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Stephen, for a very good report. I just wanted to offer some historical perspective. This is the lowest index I've seen of our streets in the last 10 years. We've always been pretty good about staying on top of things, but Stephen's mentioning of the pandemic really, I think, is the sort of the key part of it. So I'm glad to see that we've got a plan and we're getting back on track. So thanks again, Stephen, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
Any other questions this evening? Okay, seeing none, I will open it up to public comment. If you'd like to make a public comment, you can use the Zoom function or call in at this time. Crystal, is there anyone waiting to make a public comment this evening?
No, there are no hands up for this item.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion? I'll open it up to council discussion now. Okay, seeing none, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate your time. I will look forward to talking about the budget and getting this paid for coming up soon. And we will now move on to new business, consideration of accepting the housing element annual progress report for 2021 and direct staff to submit the report to the California Department of Housing and Community Development and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Tonight we have Lisa Porras giving us the presentation. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Lisa Porras, Planning Manager. The item before you this evening is the 2021 Annual Progress Report for the 2015 to 2023 housing element. Next slide. The Annual Progress Report covers the period between January 1 through December 31, 2021, and is required by the State Department of Housing and Community Development to be completed and submitted by April 1 every year. The state requires reporting on 10 different data sets. The one that typically draws the most attention is number 3, which is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Progress, representing the number of new units issued by affordability. Next slide. In 2021, housing applications and building permit activity consisted of 41 net new units approved and 47 net new units that received building permits. These mostly consisted of accessory dwelling units, but we also saw permits issued for a few multifamily and mixed-use housing projects as well, including one which included one moderate below market rate housing unit. So just as a reminder, the measuring progress for our regional housing needs allocation is based on building permits issued for net new residential construction. Next slide. So for the 2015 to 2023 planning period, San Carlos's regional housing needs allocation consists of a total of 596 units, which includes 413 below market rate units in the very low, low, and moderate income categories. Next slide. Out of the 596 net new units representing San Carlos's housing needs target for the 2015 to 2023 planning period, a total of 622 net new units have been added to our inventory since 2015, with one more year to go. While this figure exceeds the overall total of 596 units, This has mostly been accomplished in the above moderate or market rate housing unit category. While a total of 50 net new affordable units have come online since 2015, a total of 363 affordable units remain as part of the current RHNA cycle. While the role of the city is not necessarily that of a residential developer, the city is required to ensure that zoning and programs are in place to facilitate the construction of new residential development. Next slide. So while last year we had one moderate income unit come online to reach a total of 50 affordable units since 2015, there are other efforts underway to facilitate the production of more affordable units in the city. One example is the below market rate ordinance update. The council recently held a study session on the below market rate ordinance update, where there is direction to increase the percentage of affordable units with deeper affordability in the ownership projects and making more ownership projects responsible for constructing units by lowering the current threshold from 7 to 5 units. Next slide. And in addition, there are approximately 62 net new affordable units in various stages of development, from pending building permits to current planning permit review. And there are 30 affordable units that have recently been completed or nearing completion and ready for occupancy. So while 62 units may seem to be a slow climb to meet affordable housing needs, it is more affordable units than we've seen in the last 7 years combined. Next slide. The annual Housing Progress Report also requires that we report on action items and programs contained in the housing element document. And these are directly in response to 7 policy categories required by the state. Many of these are ongoing items and activities done on a regular basis, including assistance in the form of financial contributions. Next slide. So just to wrap up, I wanted to share a couple of slides on where we are currently at with our current housing element update. So far, we've accomplished the first phase of community outreach, working with those who attended the workshops to provide their ideas and responses for meeting our new regional housing needs allocation of 2,735 units from the year 2023 to 2031. And a big part of the discussion was to determine how and where these units could go in our existing environment. So while San Carlos will get to count any units that are receiving a certificate of occupancy after June of this year, plus any projects currently in the pipeline, including what's been built on vacant or underutilized sites, plus accessory dwelling units, these units combined won't reach the target number. Therefore, the more focused conversation with the community has been where density and building height can be increased to accommodate more units for any future projects that are proposed. Next slide. The current status in terms of where we're at now is we're currently working to develop the draft policy documents for the land use, housing, and safety elements, plus the accompanying amendments to the zoning ordinance for consistency with proposed housing element policies. We anticipate a study session to discuss the draft policy documents and the accompanying zoning ordinance amendments with the public and Planning Commission in May of this year, which would then be followed up shortly by another study session with the City Council thereafter. And following these study sessions with direction from the Council, staff will then submit the draft housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for review in this summer. So we expect that there will be several rounds of review with the state based upon what we're seeing in other regions throughout the state. And then staff will bring the policy documents back for formal adoption in the fall of this year and in time to meet state certification requirements by the end of January 2023. So this concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to try and address any questions the council may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Great presentation. We'll open it up to questions from the council. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Lisa, for the presentation and update. I had a couple of quick questions on the timing of some things. So for I know you talked about some of the items that we're looking at for the affordable housing BMR ordinance update. Is the intention to bring that in at the same time as we do the overall housing element and RHNA numbers approval, or is it what's sort of, can you just sort of explain sort of where all the timing fits in on everything?
Sure. So for the below market rate ordinance update conversations, and I know Adam Aronson is here tonight. So if Adam, you wanted to jump in and clarify anything that I might say, please feel free. But the approach to that is to move forward with the below market rate ordinance now. It's not something that needs to wait for the housing element to be adopted and then do. We can certainly do it now. And it's my understanding that after the last study session with the City Council and the input that was received, staff is currently working to bring an ordinance forward. But I'm not quite sure exactly the timing on that, other than that it doesn't need to wait all year.
That's exactly right. Sorry.
Go ahead, Adam. No, Adam, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll just say, yeah, that's right. Exactly. I think within the next month or two, we'll have something before you.
Great. That's fantastic. Thank you. And then Lisa, in terms of just so I understand correctly, the items that there's a difference between sort of the certificate of occupancy and when things are approved. And so can you just clarify like what counts in what cycle and where? So you said after June 30th, or the date that we can count those towards the next RHNA cycle?
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
So let's say the Walnut project, that the 817 Walnut, it's finished or just about done, right? Let's say that's going to be counted though. So assuming that would count in this current RHNA cycle, is that right? But the new project that we're looking at Cherry, even if things were approved sort of to begin construction, I'm just making this up, before June 30th, that would count in the next cycle?
That's correct. So the project at 817 Walnut counts within the current 2015 to 2023 cycle of the total 590 units. So it's very likely, I mean, the 1232 project will not get a building permit issued, before June 30th this year. So we will be able to count those units in the upcoming cycle.
Got it.
Any other units that get their certificate of occupancy after June 30th. So it's sort of a little bit of a little bit different in the way that we count progress to meet those are absolutely counted by building permits issued. But in order to show the state that we have enough sites to meet the 2,735 new units, we can look at projects that receive their certificate of occupancy after June this year that, would ratchet down that 2,735 number just a little bit, right? So it's one is looking at building permits, and one is kind of making the case that we have enough sites to accommodate the I'm sorry, I keep messing that up. It's a big number, so 2,735 new units for the next cycle.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Great. Thank you for the clarification. Sure. That's all I had, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Any other questions for Lisa this evening? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and open the public comment. If you would like to make a public comment now on this agenda item, you may raise your hand via Zoom. Crystal, is anyone waiting to make a public comment this evening?
No, there are no hands for this item.
Okay, thank you. We can now open it up to council discussion. Any discussion from my colleagues on this item tonight? Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Lisa, for the good report. But I just don't want us to gloss over the fact that we're just to recap, we 35 new homes were completed in our town in 2021, and we approved 47 new homes in our town last year. Presumably those will get finished up perhaps this year. So that's actually underneath our average. We've built on average 65 per year over the last 10 years. And again, that's 35 and 47, what we're seeing in 2021 and likely in 2022. I just want to highlight that.
You know, and even worse, when you look at it from a below market rate perspective, we've gotten 50 built in the past 7 years. That's on average 7 per year. So I just want us to collectively recognize we're not really achieving our housing goal here. And I know we're doing some good work on our housing element, and we will be upzoning considerable areas of El Camino and other transit-oriented areas. And I would just, you know, want us to keep in mind that we need to start thinking about doing things a little bit differently if we're serious about having housing that will keep up with the 6, 7, 8,000 new jobs that perhaps are coming to town. And what comes to my mind is as we're having these plan development negotiations with the life science folks in the east side, perhaps we should ask them as part of their negotiation to develop housing for us where it makes sense by way of our zoning. And right now, I think that would be in the upzoned areas along El Camino. And I would just encourage us as a council to be more than open-minded about having that pretty high on our list as we go into those negotiations. And I'm also encouraged that we are proceeding on that Northeast area specific plan. And I think housing needs to be top of mind as we're having those conversations. And I just wanted to, just use the simple facts that, what we've done in housing over the last couple of years just isn't getting it done. So I just wanted to pause to recognize that fact. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, John. Councilmember Palmer Lohan, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, thank you. My Wi-Fi cut out for a moment there. Almost lost y'all. So I just want to also acknowledge that, this has been a conversation we've been having for some time since I know Vice Mayor Rack and Mayor McDowell and I joined. It was recognized, early on that meeting those lower levels of affordability is a complete challenge. And I recognize Mayor McDowell working on HEART knows this all too well with respect to the financing piece of it. That all being said, I feel like there's a lot of good discussion that we've had recently with the most recent study session on the BMR ordinance, as well with the commercial development that's coming in. This council has expressed commitment, continued expressed commitment to making sure affordable housing stocks are created. Staff's commitment to try to find innovative ways that we can make these projects pencil out. And more importantly, the fact that I'm just reflecting on when, I was elected to this council and there was a call for a moratorium on all development. And the most recent characteristics community survey, unsolicited feedback from the community, the second highest thing that the community asked for was affordable housing. So I believe that the wind is at our backs on this. And I think we're putting, pencil to paper and talking to diverse stakeholders to understand what conditions we need to put in place in order to get this housing created. So I'm feeling very optimistic with this upcoming housing element and some of the other actions that are being taken by this council. So thank you very much for the report. Clearly there's more work to do. I know we can, because we think we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer Lohan. I think that's very well said. I'll just chime in and say that I'm really happy. I think that we've been working for the past 2 years on putting the building blocks in our community of garnering support for increased housing, starting with the Home for All conversations that we all talked about 3 years ago. And now, our East Side Vision Plan, in fact, contains language that specifies our preference for the direct provision of housing versus the in lieu fees. So I do think that we are working to put the building blocks in place to see housing come to light. Are there any other council members wishing to participate in discussion? Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just wondering if you're ready for a motion.
Yes, I see no other hands. Go ahead.
All right. I move to adopt the Housing Element Annual Progress Report for 2021 and direct staff to submit the report to the California Department of Housing and Community Development and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research.
I'll second that. I'll defer to Vice Mayor Brack.
Fine, either way. I'll let the mayor decide.
We'll go with the deferment to Vice Mayor Brack. Any other further discussion? Okay, seeing none, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Okay. Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. We'll move on to 8D, consideration of fiscal year 2022-23 mid-cycle budget adjustments and adopting a resolution adopting the proposed mid-cycle fiscal year 2022-23 general fund appropriation budget. Tonight we have City Manager Jeff Maltby and Rebecca Mendenhall. Jeff, I guess I'll turn it over to you first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, and good evening, members of the council. For those of you that have known me for a while, you know that the budget's one of my favorite items of the year. So I'm very excited to be with you this evening discussing what we've got for you. It's a very exciting set of proposals that we have for you that span pretty much the full breadth of our organization. There's millions in additional funding requests, a number of requests for new full-time positions, additional money for studies, quite a few of them related to the goals and deliverables outlined in the Eastside Vision Plan that was adopted last year. So things continue to move forward, and we continue to be very busy at City Hall. One of the sort of themes of questions and discussions I've had with city staff and council members and individually in preparation for tonight's meeting falls into several different themes, and they very much are in line with the questions that I've asked myself and I've asked the staff to be mindful of as they've worked on these proposals for the last year that are before you this evening. And they fall into three primary categories. The cost, in terms of the operating budget, these are ongoing costs. Do we have the money to be able to afford these additions as we move forward? And I believe the answer to that is yes. We've spun off budget surpluses for the last decade. We've used that money wisely to build up city reserves, to fund millions and millions in capital infrastructure improvement projects throughout the community across disciplines within the city. And we've prepaid retirement obligations to drive down operating costs. We've used that money very wisely, and now I think based on the work in front of us, both coming into us from the community and at the direction of the City Council, it's time to invest some of that annual savings back into our operating budget, anticipating that that investment will also return dividends as we move forward in the form of additional tax revenue in the future as our property tax base, our primary source of income, continues to grow and flourish, both within our residential community and the commercial base in our downtown and on the east side. In terms of the second category, you can think of it in terms of need. Is there enough work, not just this year, right now, to justify hiring additional full-time staff, but for the foreseeable future? And I believe the answer to that is yes. Much of what we've been dealing with, both at the City Council level and the staff level throughout the community, is tied to development. The council's working hard to update its housing element and housing and land use policies to encourage the creation of additional housing in our community to meet our RHNA numbers, to try to achieve our affordable housing goals. This has been a priority of the council for some time. There's quite a bit of planning work and then project work that comes in to make those goals a reality. We've adopted our East Side Vision Plan. We have a number of large-scale projects working their way through various stages of the review process that are going to need to be and continue to be processed. I'm sure there'll be other projects that we're unaware of at this point that will come up, later this year that we'll hear of, or next year or the year after. So we can anticipate that will continue for a while to come. We've kicked off a full downtown specific planning process to look at revamping and updating our downtown, including its land use policies. That's kicking off. The Northeast industrial area specific plan is going to be kicked off this year. Those plans will go on for a couple of years and generate, lots of work and subsequent studies and things that need to be done and EIRs along the way. We've got a number of large-scale development agreements to process going forward. We've got plans in the future that we would like to attempt as we get through this phase of planning in terms of our South Laurel area, our industrial arts area, other priority areas that this city council has identified. And then in the future, we'll need to do a new EIR for our general plan and then future general plan updates. So the long range planning needs of the city aren't going to go away, this year, next year, and are likely going to continue to be pretty robust for the next decade as we continue to plan for the future of the community over the next 60 or 70 years. And then the third category that, I've really tried to keep my focus on is are these things relevant? Are they tied into the city council's strategic goals? Do they align themselves with the community surveys that we've done? And the answer there is a resounding yes. I think, 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago, we had 3 new members of our city council come on, and there's a big adjustment period for new council members. When you come on to the city council, much of what you're dealing with is work that's in progress, started by a previous city council, often, fairly well developed, not a lot of opportunity for input or change. You work through that, you start to see your agenda begin to coalesce, towards the end of the first year, into the second year, into the third year. And this budget, I think, really overwhelmingly reflects the priorities and vision of the current city council. It's focused on streets, sidewalks, bike and pedestrian planning. There's millions of additional funding for those areas, and the council's increased those areas in the past. And that's a fairly new development. In the 1990s, there was, a sort of concerted effort by the state of California to either, when they cut taxes, cut local taxes as opposed to state taxes, or when there were budget problems, to try to divert local tax dollars to Sacramento to offset their budget deficits. And one of the things that we saw were, our VLF taxes, which primarily fund police, and our gas taxes impacted by those cuts at the state level that reduced or stymied the growth of gas tax for municipal governments. And for many years, the theory and policy of the city council was they were going to spend all the gas tax money that they got on streets and sidewalks and bike and ped type projects. And that was it. If the taxes went up, we'd do more work. And if they didn't, we'd do what we could with the money that we had. And it was really this city council who has pushed to add general fund dollars to supplement that gas tax funding that's allowed us to really begin to ramp up funding for those key projects in our community. And it's something that, the community has overwhelmingly stated in surveys and communication with the city that they have wanted to see for a number of years. So there's lots of funding in this budget. I think over the next 5 years, we're planning on spending something akin to an additional like 35 million in terms of those types of projects. So there's quite a bit going on here. And one last element that I'll talk about before I hand it off to Rebecca to get into some of the specifics. In terms of those three categories that I started with, the cost, the need, and the relevance, those three questions that I kept asking myself in the process. One thing to keep in mind is a lot of this work, as I said earlier, particularly in community development and public works, is tied to these projects. And those projects, they pay fees, building fees, and other permitting fees as those projects come in. And that money helps offset the cost of staff. So we can only spend the money that's justified by the amount of expenditure that we're spending as well. And this area of the city has been growing for the last 20 years, and it's been growing rapidly the last 5 years. And it's time now to increase the expenditure side of it to justify to help justify that fee revenue that we're charging those projects that then goes ahead and offsets those costs. And it ties into, my final theme, which has to do with, just sort of the overall health and well-being of our organization and our workforce. It's been a very busy several years within the city, even COVID sort of excluded as a special case. And we run a really small staff, and it's catching up. And we want to make sure that we have, enough staff and enough redundancy that, people can do a good job with these high-profile, highly important projects that they're assigned, and still have room to have working for the city of San Carlos be, a good life choice. That they can still take a family vacation, still, unplug on the weekend, and then come back and know that they're working for an organization that wants to help and support them to do the very best job and work they can do. And so along those lines, there are some upgrades being proposed from part-time to full-time in the budget. There's some promotional opportunities in the budget for some of our communication and environmental staff to reflect their seniority, their capability, where they're at in their careers, and to help ensure that their careers continue in San Carlos and they aren't picked off by one of our neighboring cities for just a little bit more money than what we've been able to pay them, and see that experience go and benefit another neighboring community. So we're thinking about our current needs and our current projects for the next year in this budget, but we're also looking out for, over the next 5 and 10 years as we plan and look at these budgets. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca, who can walk you through the specifics of these proposals, and I'll be happy to answer any questions for you and join in the discussion when we're finished up.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Rebecca Mendenhall, Administrative Services Director. Before you tonight is the recommended budget adjustments to the general fund, including a resolution to amend the appropriations. Next slide, please. Last June, the Council adopted the fiscal year 2021-23 biennial budget, which was the result of an inclusive and interactive staff budget development process. Council held 2 budget study sessions on April 26th and May 1st in 2021, and has provided direction to staff throughout the year. Resolution 2021-50 was adopted on June 14th, 2021, and set the appropriation levels or expenditure limits for both of those fiscal years. In the second year of the budget, departments are given an opportunity to review their projections and request additional funding if needed. Tonight we'll be discussing changes to the general fund, the wastewater fund, or the sewer fund, and the other capital funds. As Jeff mentioned, in the general fund, there are a number of staffing changes and program enhancements that have been recommended and incorporated into the proposed adjusted budget for you tonight. These changes are necessary to implement the strategic plan objectives, to support the increased level of development activity, to manage the increase in infrastructure projects, and to advance the increase in communication needs. On March 14th, the City Council adopted the strategic plan, which included these objectives. These are the items that rest above the waterline or are in addition to the operational tasks already provided by staff. Next slide, please. The iceberg model of city work that we use when we study the strategic plan reflects the amount of time spent above and below the waterline and shows that 80% of city time is spent doing the routine work of the city. In order to maintain the city's operations and also accomplish its strategic objectives, additional resources across the organization are needed. In particular, this will require more resources in the Advanced Planning Division of Community Development, Parks and Recreation, Public Works, and the City Manager's Office. The city is experiencing an unprecedented number of commercial, industrial, life science applications on the east side. Following decades of long-standing property ownership, numerous large parcels on the east side will be or have been acquired by new owners seeking to renew and rebuild aging buildings. As of now, we anticipate the need to plan for and consider applications for approximately 3.5 million square feet of net new commercial development. In addition, new long-range planning efforts such as the Downtown Specific Plan, Northeast Area Specific Plan, recently completed East Side Plan, and the General Plan Housing Element Update will create much more opportunity for development and economic investment. Currently, there are 18 commercial, office, and industrial projects in various stages of review and approval. 9 of these projects have been approved and will require significant staff time across all departments, as well as management of outside consultant resources to manage these projects to completion. Review and advisory support of these projects is highly technical in nature and requires high-level professional expertise. In particular, additional resources will be needed in the building and current planning divisions in community development and the Public Works plan check and inspection programs. Next slide. We'll discuss the requested changes to the capital projects in more detail in a bit, but as discussed in the State of the Streets presentation earlier, there is a need for large investment in street resurfacing projects to maintain and improve our pavement management index ratings. As part of the strategic plan, there's a large amount of effort related to efficient, safe, and effective movement and mobility through the city, which includes the implementation of the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan and responses to traffic calming requests. In addition to the capital funding or investment needed to achieve these goals, managing this level of construction will require significant staff time, specifically in Public Works, and the City Manager's Office as it relates to communication related to this construction. Next slide. There's been a steadily increasing demand for city communication, both in volume and in scope. Every one of the strategic goals and objectives contains crucial communication and outreach efforts. One staff member is neither adequate nor sustainable to meet the ever-growing demands for professional and timely communication. Next slide. So the proposed changes represent a balanced operating budget for fiscal year 22-23, as shown in the table here. These changes also include a request to transfer an additional $400,000 from the Facilities and Infrastructure Reserve to the Gas Tax Fund to offset the cost of street repairs, as Jeff mentioned earlier. The revised budget shown here reflects all adjustments previously approved by the Council. Accounting adjustments those represent any changes to our assumptions and revenues and expenses, and those are based on historical trends, projections, and projections based on current economic trends and conditions, as well as information from our third-party consultants. I'll get into the detail of these 2022-23 requests in the next few slides. But as you can see on the right side of the screen, the total change in the operating fund is $13,000. So we have a tiny surplus there, but we're able to present this in a balanced format. Next slide. So additional detail on the revised organization charts can be found in your packet beginning on pages 81 through 115. But I'll briefly list the requests by department here for you. In the City Manager's budget, it's recommended to reclassify a management analyst position to a communications manager to reflect the need to retain professional support for the entire organization. There's a request to reclassify another management analyst position to a senior sustainability analyst, and this will support the implementation of the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan, or CMAP. There's a request to add new communications coordinator to further the outreach goals and additional funding to implement the CMAP. Next slide. In the Community Development Department, there's a request to add a new Assistant Community Development Director, a new Senior Admin Clerk for current planning, and this will be offset by contractor savings as we're currently contracting for this service. A new Associate Planner in Advanced Planning, a new Building Inspector position, a new Senior Planner position in current planning. This will also be offset by contractor savings as those tasks are currently outsourced. An additional new permit technician in building, a contract plan or additional contract planning support in advanced planning, additional funding for arborist services, which will be offset by permit fees, and additional professional services for advanced planning for mapping, research, and analysis services. In Public Works, there's a request to add a senior traffic engineer position, a senior maintenance worker for facilities to help manage the 2 new parking lots down at Wheeler Plaza and the one in South Laurel, administrative assistant in engineering, a senior maintenance worker in parks to manage the preventative maintenance program in our open space areas, add a public works inspector position, as well as a civil engineering assistant to help support the new traffic engineer. In Parks and Recreation, there's a request to expand the Adult Community Center lunch program to 4 days a week. This would include the upgrade of a part-time cook position to full-time, and this will be offset by revenue from the additional day, as well as some grants that we believe we can get. And there's also a request to reclassify a recreation supervisor to a recreation manager position. In administrative services, there's a request to restore the professional recruitment services that we cut during the pandemic and have not yet put back in the budget. And there's a request to add a management analyst position to assist with the management of the federal grants and infrastructure grants locally, both county and state, as well as our contract and purchasing programs. So as I mentioned, additional detail in the long-term forecast can be found on pages 116 and 117 of your packet. But in summary, the staff recommended net additions total approximately 3.1 million and will result in an unrestricted fund balance of approximately 2 million for fiscal year 22-23. So that concludes my presentation, and the department heads and I are available for any questions you have.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your insight and thorough report. We'll open it up to questions now. Any questions from council colleagues? Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Rebecca, thanks for the thorough presentation and all the work in the packet as well. It certainly makes things easier to go through. I just wanted to have like one question and one kind of comment in general. One, I appreciate the, I guess, so let me ask about I saw that there's an request for an increase in the arborist position as well. Is that to anticipate kind of where we might, where staff might be recommending for the ordinance that's the sort of permanent ordinance that we'll be considering? Is that sort of in line with that, or we're not sort of getting ahead of ourselves with that? I just want to make sure we're sort of matching that up.
Yes, it's in line with what we believe to have been the the overall sort of comment spirit of the direction and comments that we had received from City Council during those discussions, so that it would be able to accommodate what we currently do, but also any additional changes that the council might consider in the near future.
Got it. Thank you, Jeff. And then Rebecca, for the administrative services position, for that additional, I think it's a management position, you highlight sort of around the need to add that position because of grants, federal grants, infrastructure grants from the states as well. Do you anticipate that that workload is sort of goes far enough out to warrant a full-time position versus a contractor on something now, or is it that just the kind of work that really can't be done by a contractor, needs to be done by a full-time position?
Well, this position would work closely with our senior accountants. So it's not just, we have the ARPA funds, but we also have other federal grants and other state and local grants that we get that we need to work closely with Public Works to make sure that we have all of the documentation required for our single audits. In addition to that, we're implementing a contracts module, and we're constantly working with the departments and to update our purchasing, or not update our purchasing policy, but to continue to make sure that our contracts are in line with our purchasing policies and the municipal code. So I anticipate there being plenty of work for this position to do. They can also help backfill with some of the other areas in my department.
Okay, no, that's helpful to add, just to add a little color on some of the other activities. Certainly is a full load of things that can be done. So thank you for that clarification. I have no further questions, Madam Mayor, and I appreciate all the work that that's gone into this.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Any other questions for Rebecca or Jeff? Okay, I have two quick questions. Rebecca, I know that you've touched on this in your presentation, but for the public's benefit, could you just talk a little bit about how the city is paying for this increase in staffing? And I believe it's coming from existing funds and not our reserves, but could you touch on that just a little bit more, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we've gone back through and we've looked at our increases in revenue, specifically in our property tax. So property tax, as all the development is taking place on the east side. So Jeff mentioned that some of these positions will have cost recovery from our user fees or from our permits. And as that development takes place, and as the contract or as the development is done, it gets added to our property tax rolls. And so there's kind of a timing difference. And so what we're seeing now is we're seeing some of the increases in that development now that, say, Alexandria's building is final. We're going to start to see those revenues come into our property tax rolls. And once they're on the assessed roll, they increase at 2% per year. So they're on the tax roll. And so that's the majority of how we're able to cover this, as well as recovery from other funds. Certain positions do work in other funds. And so there's an overhead cost allocation that we can recover those position costs from.
Great, that's very helpful, thank you. And then my second question is, so I counted in your slides, we were looking at 14 new positions. I'm just wondering what percentage increase in staff? Is that like a 20% increase in our current staff? I know Jeff mentioned that we have a relatively small staff compared to other cities. So just wondering percentage-wise what that works out to.
It's about a 17% increase.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rebecca. Any other questions before I open it up to public comment? Okay, seeing none. Crystal, could we please move to public comment on this item? You may, if you wish to make a public comment, you may do so now by raising your hand or by calling in. Crystal, anyone waiting to make a public comment this evening?
No, there are no hands for this item.
Okay, thank you. We'll move back to discussion. Any further discussion from the council this evening? Councilmember Collins and then Councilmember Palmer-Lumpkin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My thanks to Jeff and to Rebecca for a great presentation tonight on this item. It's truly a reflection of our council priorities and our strategic planning, and it's very well crafted. And it's also just nice to see that our financial position has improved steadily throughout the years, despite some funding shortfalls like vehicle license fees and that sort of thing. But to me, it's all just a reflection of really good planning, good execution by staff, and good decisions by not only this council, but prior councils. So the only real comment I wanted to say or make was that we're just continuing to adapt and to an evolving climate that not an environmental climate, but a climate of change in city funding and how we operate the city. And I'm just glad to see that this has been so competently managed. And so thank you again.
Thanks, Ron. Councilmember Palmer Lohan and then Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I also want to echo Councilmember Collins's gratitude to staff. The framing of the approach that's being taken, I think, is extraordinarily clear and helpful to understand and follow. And, what strikes me about this conversation is that this isn't business as usual. And we're headed towards a new norm. What I hear staff is doing is going to where the work is and transforming the organization to ensure that we can meet the moment, and not only meet the moment, but what I also really appreciate is the opportunity to grow and develop staff. We talked at the end of last year during the mini retreat, the challenges that San Carlos is facing, like so many other municipalities, around recruiting and retention, and to harness this opportunity to really address some of those concerns, I think is very, very appropriate. I like the, wanting to make sure that the departments are fully staffed to address the various projects that are underway and that are on the way. And I also like kind of the roundedness of it, in particular, expanding the meal program at ACC, a fourth day. We do know that from our data and some of our focus group work that we did for age-friendly cities, that there are many of our community members that are feeling isolated. And by giving them that extra day and that extra touch point, I think is a really great thing. And it doesn't cost a lot, clearly, but will provide an opportunity for relationships to be built and sustained. And also to address some of the concerns that Stephen Machida shared with us around public works in the streets program. We need to get those back in shape. So I'm really appreciative of this, and I'm going to be supporting this evening. So thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thanks, Laura. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Jeff and Rebecca. I too share my colleagues' perspective that this was a very thoughtful planning exercise that staff went through, and that this really does reflect where we're headed as a community. And I appreciate Laura's comment that this isn't business as usual, and we should just acknowledge that, we've done very well fiscally as a city. And when you do have long-term structural surpluses, at some point you should ask, is there a point that maybe we should charge less fees, or, we don't have to spend everything we bring in. But we're in a very much an inflection point as a city. And so I think this is a good vehicle for us to recognize that, we have all this significant development coming to the east side. We have a number of significant goals as a council. And so I think this plan really does recognize that. And I think we are in a position where we actually do need to use these resources to make sure we're out in front on these issues and providing sustainable leadership. And I do just compliment staff from the additional communication staffing and the recognition that adequately and thoroughly communicating with our community is a high goal that kind of transcends all of our goals. I think that was a great observation. And so I'm glad we're being very deliberate and serious in that regard. Climate plan is getting additional staffing because that is a clear high priority of ours. And then all the deep planning we're doing, whether on the east side with our downtown specific plan or our new northeast industrial area, we've got a lot of work to do. And I'm glad we're going to have the staff to really be in front of all those hardy negotiations and the back and forth we're going to have to work through on all of that. And then the final just a larger message of sustainability and staffing. We do have a staff that, we might face some retirement, we might face some turnover. It's just sort of that era of our city. And I really appreciate, Jeff, your leadership in really thinking through sustainability and where we'll be in 5 and 10 years. And I think this plan is a big step in that process. So I firmly support it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I, again, just want to thank Rebecca and her team and Jeff and really all the staff for their hard work on this. I think it's a thoughtful budget that's put together. I think it's a prudent budget that does reflect the, sort of what the future looks like. And I think it's a sustainable one also from the standpoint of we're not hiring positions that, will go away in 2 or 3 years. They're positions that are here to stay, that, the work will certainly be here and allow us to better serve the community as well. We've sort of, as we've worked on sort of probably being understaffed or maybe not quite staffed enough. And I think this gets us to where we are, to the reality of what's moving forward. And I appreciate, I think the support of all my colleagues around this as well. I think it's been a good discussion back and forth. And I think we've sort of sent the message that said, these are priorities and we want, we're willing to support the funding for that. And I think it's a good partnership that's happened between both staff and the council on this. And I look forward to the next several years ahead. They're very exciting ones. And I look forward to supporting this budget.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to go ahead and chime in too. I too am really pleased that these recommendations have come forward. I do want to thank staff for thinking creatively and thinking about a growth plan. Our budget and staff increases will set us up to tackle a tremendous amount of work, as Jeff mentioned, that is coming our way over the next 2 decades. And we've heard from our community that they want us to take an active role in managing development in San Carlos. And I think with the additional staff, we will be able to be set up to accomplish that while also keeping up with the day-to-day functions of the city. With the increase in staff, I want to reiterate my strong preference for making sure we have a point person on staff who is tasked with tracking environmental remediation. Much of the development on the east side that is taking place is on land that has various levels of contamination that need to be remediated as part of the development project. And I think it's important that we as a city have a strong handle on the cleanup efforts. And in the interest of transparency, I want to make sure that we're posting the environmental cleanup reports on our project site. So I think just having someone assigned as a point person would be a good move for us. I'm really happy to see us expanding our lunch program, as Councilmember Parmer-Lohan mentioned, to 4 days a week at the ACC. We've seen an increase in demand for meals that has doubled in the past year, so I'm thrilled that we're meeting that need. I'm very happy that we're building out staff in our community development department. I'm also thrilled that we're building out our public works positions. I noted that this will enable a citywide construction activities website to be developed and updated, and I think that's a wonderful move. And also ensuring that there's some traffic calming and safe route to school projects that can be accomplished. So with that, I too will be supporting this evening. Is there any other further discussion, or I will entertain a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move to adopt resolution 2022-32, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos adopting the proposed mid-cycle fiscal year 2022 to 2023 general fund appropriation budget.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Parmer-Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Okay, we'll move on to item 8C, consideration of fiscal year 2022-23 mid-cycle budget adjustments and adopting a resolution adopting the proposed mid-cycle fiscal year 2022-23 capital fund budget. And Rebecca Mendenhall, you can take it away. Thank you.
Sorry, I need to turn off my mute. Similar to the general fund, the departments have had the opportunity to review the capital projects and request additional funding. The capital project budgets fund major one-time and ongoing infrastructure improvements. Funds are typically accumulated over a period of years and then spent when a sufficient amount of revenue is available to pay for the desired projects. There is sufficient revenue or fund balance to finance the proposed changes that we're going to discuss tonight. And more detail on these changes can be found beginning on page 128 in your packet. Next slide. So the first fund that has changes is the wastewater or the sewer fund. This is the city's only enterprise fund, and as such, it is managed like a business enterprise. Revenues received from rates can only be used to fund sewer-related projects. So the only change that's being recommended here is to add $40,000 to the existing rate study project, and that will cover the cost of updating the sewer connection fee. In the gas tax fund, there are three changes. The gas tax fund is used to account for revenue received and expended under the State of California Street Highways Code sections 2106 to 2107, as well as SB1, Measure A, and Measure W. These funds can only be used towards streets, improving transit and traffic congestion. The first change is to add more funding to the annual street resurfacing project. As discussed earlier tonight in the State of the Streets report, an additional $11.12 million over the next 4 years has been requested. As reflected on page 132 of your packet, this request will be funded from the Facilities Infrastructure Reserve. The Facilities Infrastructure Reserve is prior year savings that's been set aside for this purpose. The second request is to add $700,000 over the next 4 years in alignment with the strategic plan to improve pedestrian crossings and maximize mobility. Next slide. The last update to the gas tax fund is to create a new project for Burton Park sidewalk improvements. This will remove and replace the existing sidewalk, reconstruct the curb ramps, rehabilitate the roadway, and add new striping and markings. Next slide. So the general capital fund, this accounts for all of our general capital improvements and replacements, including building construction, technology, and other infrastructure improvements, as well as any of our long-term plans. The major sources of revenue into this fund are the franchise fees from the Shoreway Transfer Station and the educational revenue augmentation rebate, or our excess rebate, ERAF money that we get, which reflects property taxes that were previously taken from the state. Other sources of revenue into this fund are prior year savings from the general fund through that Facility Infrastructure Reserve. The completed projects expected to be completed this fiscal year include the park restroom replacements, the new agenda management system, pedestrian enhancement at the Arroyo Cedar and Hemlock Orange intersections, the synthetic turf replacement at Highlands, and the fuels mitigation at our city parks. Based on the council meeting direction on March 14th, we've moved the San Carlos Quick Build pilot program back to the unfunded list. Next slide. So changes to our previously approved projects. And if you'd like to follow, there are quite a few. So if you want to follow along, this does begin on page 138 in your packet. The first is to add the American Rescue Plan Act, or our ARPA funding, for the Fire Station 16 replacement, as we discussed at the January 10th council meeting, in the amount of $7 million. Additional funding requests of $100,000 for the illuminated street name sign replacement, and this is to cover increase in costs. Next slide. Additional funding of $30,000 to cover anticipated increased costs in our guardrail installation project. Additional funding of $600,000 for the sports lighting project, which includes the addition of lighting to the batting cages as requested by council. And then there's a transfer of funding from the bicycle and pedestrian master plan implementation to fund the Britton Avenue sidewalk improvements between Milano Way and Alameda de las Pulgas. Next slide. The new projects include funding to remodel the second floor offices that were previously occupied by the Chamber of Commerce, and this will serve as an annex office space for city employees. Funding to replace the decorative wall at 477 Hillcrest Road that partially failed during the heavy rains. Funding for Burton Park poured-in-place surfacing and the conversion from grass to synthetic turf at Harrington Park due to the high use in the drought. Next slide. The city facility camera is not a new project, but it's a consolidation of 3 previously approved projects so we can simplify our bidding process. And this includes the Wheeler Plaza Garage, the Corp Yard cameras, as well as the surveillance cameras in public parks. And there are several specific implementation projects that are related to the adoption of the Eastside Innovation District Plan. And these three are listed here, but there's more detail that can be found in the packet on page 147. Next slide. There are also updates to the zoning codes that are needed as a result of the adoption of the Eastside Innovation District Plan, and those are listed here, as well as funding for a Northeast area specific plan as part of the council's strategic goals. Next slide. And there are 3 additional projects: funding for tree well replacements, including irrigation on Industrial Road, funding for intersection pedestrian improvements as listed in the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan, and funding for the Safe Routes to School improvements. Moving to the housing funds. The housing funds can only be used to increase and improve the supply of housing. As noted here, there was 1 acquisition that was completed, and we're asking to transfer funding from the previously approved Cherry Street housing acquisition project to fund the demolition of 1232 Cherry Street. So no additional funding, it's just a transfer from one project to another. Next slide. The Library Improvement Fund accounts for rents and other tenant activities at the library. Revenues are used to offset building improvements and/or large maintenance projects. And staff is asking for funding of $150,000 to inspect the foundation around the library and to evaluate the stairs leading up from Cherry Street. So that concludes the changes that we'd like to make to the capital improvements budget. Again, the department heads are here. Stephen Machida is on the line as well, if they have any specific questions related to the projects.
Thank you, Rebecca. Great presentation. Are there any questions from council this evening on this item? Councilmember Dugan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, thank you, Rebecca. It's a good overview. And again, I think this is very reflective of our goals and priorities as a council and as a city. And I appreciate this planning in general. I've got 2 specific questions for Stephen. I just want to make sure, so, you know, we're doing a lot here and there's a lot of funds flowing around, and but the lion's share here is obviously towards our streets, which we got, you know, the report earlier this evening that our streets are in poor, fair conditions. So, you know, it seems like this is worth it, but want to just make sure we know, we all collectively understand what we're doing here. So, Stephen, just you know, we're talking about increases over existing, et cetera. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So we're talking about an increase of $11 million for our roads that will take the total funding over the next 4 years to $35 million. Is that the right, are those the right numbers?
Yeah, I think that's over the next 5 years, but that is the correct number, yes.
Over the next 5 years, okay, thank you. And then I just want to understand, because I also saw in here that had we been able to contribute $70 million to you, we could have gone from this fair or poor condition that we're presently in to excellent condition. 70 million, that's a lot of money, and it sounds like we're budgeting for half of that. But really my question here is, if the full 70 gets us to excellent, this report I'm looking at says $35 million, a very significant investment, takes us from 57 to 62, which is just fair. And so I guess I just want to understand the thinking and commentary around that. And is that 62 really a low end of an expectation we might have, or, you know, or are we just not doing this right? I mean, it just feels like if we're making half the investment towards excellent, we would end up in a better spot than a fair 62.
So the original goal was to kind of match the the countywide average, which was at 67. So ultimately, as I mentioned earlier in the streets report is, the ideal goal is to always try to achieve the PCI of 70. That kind of gets you between the good and excellent, and just try to maintain that level. So if you looked at that kind of chart from the 2020 PMP, we had quite a few cities that were in the kind of low 70s. And so ultimately that's where you like to go. However, after talking to many of the directors, it does take quite a bit of money to be spent kind of early on. It's like kind of getting a big boulder rolling. You've got to put a lot of effort in to get it rolling. But once you get it rolling, you kind of maintain that momentum of the boulder itself. So in this case, we really do need to kind of spend the money to move and start the progress of improving our streets. And then as long as you keep maintaining or actually funding the program, you ultimately will start benefiting, and you'll start seeing movement in the PCI to at least 67 or greater.
Okay, thank you. And so it sounds like we might do better than 62 with that investment. So good. And the boulder rolling, I like that analogy. And just a quick question. So I really it looks like we're making a ongoing sustainable investment now into sidewalks based upon our safe travel to schools study, and an ongoing investment to our pedestrian bicycle plan. Do those kind of ongoing, they're each at $500,000 a year, I believe. In your view, does that represent we're getting the boulder rolling on those two programs in a sustainable, ongoing way?
So, I mean, that's kind of the start. And certainly, I think every community is also looking at, the opportunity. And so there are a lot of grant funds out there. Unfortunately, we had to turn down one grant at the last meeting, that Quick Build project. The 500,000, it's a good start, but it will take some effort, and there will probably be future investments where we'll have to actually invest in to accomplish a lot of the improvements that are identified in the bicycle master plan. Is it something, would I like to see more? Certainly, but I think with the effort that we're going to do toward the streets as well as the sidewalks, I think this is a very good start.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. We'll move on to Vice Mayor Beck.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had two questions. I think they're probably for Stephen then obviously on these. I noticed for both I'm assuming the playground at Burton Park is the sort of the little kids playground that you're talking about, that you replace the grass and put turf on. Is that right?
I believe perhaps Amy might be able to answer, but I believe that is correct.
Maybe answer that.
Yeah, it will be both play areas, the tot and the 5 to 12.
But there's no grass on the 5 to 12, is there?
There is. It's on kind of just runs along Chestnut, and where there's an enclosure for some of our trash containers.
Along Chestnut.
There should be grass.
Okay. Oh, I think I know what you're talking about.
It's a lot of where, yeah.
Okay. And then the tot area, and then also at Harrington Park as well. And the Harrington Park, is it just because it just sort of, I guess I don't usually see and think about these as places where people are playing as much at Harrington Park. Why we wouldn't look at drought resistant plants over there instead of putting just turf over there? To me, that would be better, at least for Harrington Park aesthetically, and provide better benefit for the community. Can you talk about the rationale around that?
Sure. So sometimes we have events there, or trying to think. So, we're still working through some of our events that are changing, but prior to the outdoor parklet program, the outdoor dining program, the farmers market, we would have concerts there, and it created more space for people to gather and listen to a band that may be playing on that stage. And so it does kind of just create extra space for people to stand and watch if we do have a band playing at that stage or something going on that stage at Harrington Park.
Okay, and is the thought process then that, let's say, like that turf is better there than some sort of like stepped area or place that people can just kind of have stairs or like seats for that kind of thing, if that's the main purpose?
Yeah, and some of the challenges are that there are trees that are in that grass area and along either side of those buildings that border the park. And so that was one factor. And then also is just considering a space or a material that we could just continue to have that space to use the park, to utilize the park and create space for people to be and not change too much of the look and feel of the park.
Okay. If I may, I think Amy is correct. You know, you see the canopy of the trees because the lawn, the natural lawn really doesn't receive a lot of sunlight. It really is a challenge to kind of keep that grass kind of maintained. And certainly when you see, you know, when we do have rain you know, it can become somewhat of a challenge because it does stay kind of wet again because it doesn't really have time to dry out. By actually converting this over to a turf field, I think it would be better used. And then, you know, the participants or patrons actually could kind of lay down their picnic blankets and, you know, kind of sit on the turf rather than be in the kind of a natural grass or in the muddy, wet grass itself. So, you know, from
I get that at Harrington Park, it's not, you don't get a lot of light and it makes more sense. I was just more curious if we had thought about sort of other alternatives, but I hadn't thought about the sort of the concerts or performances if that's the case. So that makes sense to me overall. And if we're just restricting it to those kind of 3 small areas, essentially is what we're talking about with that because of you're not getting as much sunlight and you're getting some very specific use. I'm okay with that. Okay. Thank you for that explanation. I don't have any further questions.
Thanks, Adam. I don't see any other hands raised. I have a few questions of my own that I'll chime in on. My first question, I think, is for Stephen. Stephen, can you talk about, well, I'm pleased to see that the Britton Avenue sidewalk improvements are happening. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how sidewalk improvements are prioritized. We received an email from a resident asking for sidewalks on Terrace Road just in the last few days. So I'm just wondering how that process works for sidewalk construction and how you prioritize.
Yeah, so you know, the Britton Avenue one that was specifically kind of requested by our city council during our strategic planning, but it also was identified in the bicycle ped master plan. And so we typically kind of look at the bicycle ped master plan and identify those projects that are identified as the critical ones. And certainly it doesn't show every single item, but sidewalk that could be done. But, you know, basically what we do try to do is if we can, if you will, kind of complete the gaps between like areas that have sidewalk versus areas don't. And if we could complete a gap and it makes sense to do that, you know, we will do so. The other concern or other issue that we need to look at just by adding sidewalk, we may need to actually kind of reprofile the road, which means we have to be able to slope it such that the rainwater or drainage water will actually flow. And so that could be taken consideration. Is what type of storm drainage or what kind of, or how do we actually drain the water off the street itself? So, you know, staff has received, I believe, that same email that you received from the Terrace resident. So we're investigating. It is something that, you know, we'll have to kind of prioritize and kind of look at, you know, how do we go about if it doesn't meet the criteria. The unfortunate thing is sometimes we just can't install certain things until we have more of the infrastructure in before.
Thank you, Stephen. My next question, I have 2 more. So I note that $500,000 is scheduled in fiscal year 23-24, 24-25, and 25-26 for improvements of our Safe Roads to School, which I'm a big fan of. it appears that there's no funding allocated for year 22-23. And so I know we just completed the walk audit, but I'm wondering if you can discuss why funding is slated for 23-24 and not earlier.
So some of the work that we will probably do this year in 2022 would be some of the things that we would look for traffic markings that, Rebecca had mentioned earlier. We are looking at, some additional sidewalk improvements. So whatever we can do, with our current budget, we will try. Unfortunately, the walk audit hasn't been completely. It has been completed. All the recommendations have been really forwarded to us. So we're looking at, knowing that this budget was going to move forward, we try to anticipate what are some of the more simple things, improvements that we can actually do and include in this budget, and then move that forward. If we find other opportunities where we can add additional sidewalk in conjunction with the bike ped master plan, we will do so. But unfortunately, it was just kind of a timing thing where we really didn't have kind of I identified the specific item where we could cost it out. We thought, well, probably if we do something safe, it would be more likely with some type of pavement marking or signage kind of work.
And I'll just add to Stephen's response too and say that typically, what you'll often see happen in the course of a year when we're designing projects is if that design work, progresses a little ahead of schedule and we're ready to, go into that bidding phase just in advance of next year's budget, we might bring that item to the council anyway and just ask that you slide some funding from the next year up a few months so that we don't have to stop working on a project and wait for that magic date to happen. So if those projects are ready a little sooner than anticipated, we'll bring them back to council and keep them flowing.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate those responses. And then my third and final question is, I'm wondering if we can add a project to the unfunded list so that at least it's noted. And for my colleagues, I'll just explain it a little bit. So we all know that the Industrial Arts District needs infrastructure improvements. This is a topic that we discussed at our last retreat. So I'd like to propose that we add a project to the unfunded list, which would be preparing a holistic plan for street, sidewalk, and streetscape improvements for the Industrial Arts District, meaning that, this would be a comprehensive plan that we could then fund as our budget allows. I recognize that we have a lot of plans going on right now, the downtown plan, the Northeast area plan. So that's why I'm suggesting that we add it to the unfunded list to at least call it out, that it's on the list for the coming years. So is that possible for council to add a project to the unfunded list?
Yeah, there's no problem with that. As I mentioned in my comments earlier, we know that that's a priority of the city council. So putting it on the unfunded list right now, I think is a good opportunity to just draw a little advanced attention to it. And then likely we'll take that and in next year's 5-year capital budget update, we'll look at trying to program that in one of the out years where we think we're going to be able to start that particular project.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So we can push that over to the discussion part of this meeting if anyone wants to chime in on that. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised for questions, so we'll go ahead and open it up to public comment. If you'd like to make a comment on this agenda item, you may raise your hand now via Zoom or call in. Crystal, is there anyone waiting now to make a public comment?
Yes, I do have one hand up. Sonia Elks, you should be able to, I have to promote you. Give me 1 second.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for taking my call. And I didn't catch the entire presentation here, just the last part. And I'm disappointed to hear about losing grass and replacing it with turf, but I understand the dilemmas and I don't have a better alternative. I just wanted to register my disappointment with drought in California in general. I realize you can't control that. And the other thing I wanted to say is the in terms of the bike pedestrian master plan and with all the streets getting repaved, or not all the streets, but many of the streets getting repaved and looking at different sidewalks and what, you know, the downtown project and what routes are going to make sense for bikes to go down and where the cars should go down, where the people should go down. There is one thing that I think would really, I realize that we don't have room for bike lanes without, you know, significantly changing the streets on narrow streets like Elm and most parts of Cedar, which are kind of the two main north-south bike routes. And I just wanted to put in a request for this, this kind of advisory lane. There's a symbol on a bike lane where the bike is supposed to line itself up. When it gets to an intersection, it's a line and then a little bike and then a line underneath there. A vertical line, little bike, and a vertical line. And it's a little symbol. And I just wonder if something like that could be painted onto our streets like Elm and Cedar and Howard, and just to show that bicyclists, especially younger children riding with families, exactly where to be on the street. And those are things I hope that can be incorporated into our you know, the recommended bicycle pedestrian master plan at really low cost that are really important. I just wanted to put another plug in for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you, Sonia. And there are no further hands.
Okay. Thank you, Crystal. Thanks, Sonia, for calling in. I will open it up to discussion now. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'll just say again, thank you to staff for another aspect of thoughtful planning here in this time with our capital budgets. And, you know, I will again agree this isn't business as usual. This is significant additional investment, but I do think it's warranted, and it's you know, it's just a good time for our city that we can recognize these priorities and have the funding available to execute on them. And so I'm glad we're taking advantage of this moment in time. And I will just say specifically, I'm very glad we're making these hard investments in our infrastructure and into our roads. These are dollars that will never leave the city. They will go into improving our transportation infrastructure. And that's always a place I'm happy to invest deeply. So I firmly support that. And I'm also glad, and as Stephen said, we're getting the boulder really rolling on taking our streets to the next level. And I would just say that I really hope this boulder is rolling now on sidewalks and our implementation of the bike and pedestrian plan. And Stephen, as your staff gets into this, you know, if this investment of $500,000 a year on each of those, $1 million a year, you know, in your view, doesn't represent an ongoing program, let's definitely talk about that at our next strategic offsite, because I would really like to see those as ongoing rolling programs, because again, those are just terrific long-term investments that will just improve the quality of life here in the City of Good Living. And then, yes, Sarah, I support your initiative on planning the Industrial Arts District. We are digesting a lot right now, so I will defer to staff on when they can catch up to that project. But that might even be worth a specific plan over there as we get further along thinking through the downtown. And maybe there's even some cross-thinking that comes out of our downtown, and we can echo some of the styling or what have you over there, and really bring it all along. So I think that's a great add, and I support adding that to the unfunded list. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Councilmember Palmer Lohan, and then Vice Mayor Rack.
Great, thank you. So here again, a really nice job by staff in pulling this together. I really appreciate the Safe Routes to School commitment that we have in here as well. Obviously, a lot of discussion tonight about road resurfacing, and the boulder analogy, I think it's good, but it makes me think that we're going to crack that asphalt. So maybe we could talk about, you know, pavers or getting the paver rolling again on that. The illuminated roadway street signs. I'm so excited about this. I can't tell you how often we ride around town in the evening and my kids point out to me that I need to submit an Inform San Carlos request because the backlit light is not working and there's a concern for safety around that. So a bright idea whose time has come to get those working again. So thank you for that. Also really appreciative of all of the various pedestrian improvements and sidewalks. I see that the segment on Britton Avenue is in here as well, and the guardrail is highlighted. The tree wells and irrigation system on the east side, that was something that was pointed out to me several years ago, right after Trestles was done. And we do have a commitment. We are Arbor Day participants in our city, and not only do we need to plant the trees, but we also need to make sure that they stay healthy. So I'm glad that we're gonna take care of that and get those going. And thrilling to see that the Cherry Street Affordable Housing Project is going to be kicking off shortly. I'm glad that we've got funds there, and of course the very significant Northeast area site-specific plan. And I would agree that we should put a pin in it with respect to the Industrial Arts District as well, just to remind ourselves that that is an area of focus that we'll need to get to in short order. So there's more, but I'm out of breath, and thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer Lohan. Vice Mayor Rack, and then Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At first, I also support the putting some shining a light on the industrial arts area and sort of having that listed as an unfunded project. Thank you for raising that. And then secondly, I think I appreciate all the work in the budget. I think it's great, a good priority, especially around the streets and sidewalks that we talked about. And then I just want to, before we vote, say, since there are some projects that are within 500 feet of Burton Park where I live, I'm going to have to recuse myself. So Greg, I will look to your guidance on how I do that from the lighting project. I think the sidewalk, I am far enough away because that's Arroyo and Chestnut. And I think I'm going to have to excuse myself. I'm not sure on the playground ones because I haven't gone out with the tape measure, and I'm probably somewhere reasonably close without cutting through the neighborhoods to kind of measure it. So,
so you would want to recuse just from participating in the vote on this lighting project and the playground, just in case it's within the 500 feet.
Right, and the sidewalk itself should be fine because that is further away because it is Arroyo, right, and Chestnut, and those are far enough away. So, thank you. And that's all I have, but I'm looking forward to supporting the rest of the items.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just wanted to add that I'm in support of this. Very thorough, very detailed, a lot of stuff, long time coming. Happy to support it, and also happy to support your idea for the industrial arts area as well.
Thanks, Ron. I'll add my comments too. I'm also, I appreciate everyone, your support with the industrial arts unfunded list. Thank you for that. I'm thrilled that we're spending $35 million over 5 years on our streets. That is a really big number for our small city, and I'm happy that we're prioritizing that. I'm also pleased to see that we are investing in bringing elements of the vision plan to life for our east side. This is not a document that's sitting around collecting dust. We are kicking off a master streetscape plan, a Pulgas Creek watershed study, a district parking study to look at shared parking. I'm glad that we're acting quickly to kick off the Northeast area specific plan process in anticipation of all the development coming. As I mentioned, I am concerned about our safe routes to school. And so I appreciated the fact that we can move up funding rather quickly if things come forward. That is definitely a priority for me. And as Councilmember Palmer Lohan mentioned, I'm also very pleased to see funding moving along for the Cherry Street Affordable Housing Project. I'm glad to see that we're bringing funding forward to keep that moving along. So with that, if there's no further discussion, I will entertain a motion.
I move to adopt resolution
33.
A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos adopting the proposed mid-cycle fiscal year 2022 to 23 capital fund budgets.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Okay, Councilmember Dugan,
Yes.
Councilmember Collins,
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack,
Yes, recusing myself from the Burton Lighting Project and the Playground Project.
noted, and Mayor McDowell.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you again to staff for that rather large item and process. We will now move on to item 9, agenda setting. Do any of my colleagues have anything that they would like added to a future agenda? Okay, seeing none, then we will adjourn. Thanks, everyone, and stay well.
Thank you. Good night.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Madam.
Good night, everybody.